So Venus is now retrograde here in Leo. We've been dealing with this retrograde Venus for a few days now, 5 or 6 days now since Venus is stationed retrograde. And so I want to talk about in this video just some themes. I want to go a little bit deeper into what Venus retrograde can imply, some of the things I've seen that have already happened, and really as a kickstart for your contemplation, for your Venus retrograde story and experience this year, summer 2023. So stay tuned. Venus retrograde in Leo, a deep dive. All right, how are you doing? It's been a little while, and I've been kind of using this retrograde myself to sort of rest a little bit, and I think it's been useful to have that mentality for me, just to kind of relax and rest has been a mantra. I'm S.J. Anderson, welcome to the channel, welcome to my astrological channel here where I talk about astrology. It's been my deliberate focus, rest and relax, and I think it's a great way to do a retrograde, is to kind of be as calm as possible and rest and relax. And there was a lot of climax there for me right before the station happened, and during the station before Venus went retrograde. I got to see both those movies, Oppenheimer and Barbie. That was a big party in the theater, it was wonderful. Released the videos that I did with Dan, so that was kind of a peak, and then just been resting and trying to get my groove back, you might say, and just rejuvenate. So I hope you're getting to do some of that. Remember, retrogrades, RE words, are the themes: review, redo, rest, revisit, revamp, all of those things. And so in this video, I just want to break down a little bit more about Venus retrograde to help you prepare. Remember, it's 40 days and 40 nights, so we're just 6 days in. There's still 34 days, most of it left, and I'll probably release this video tomorrow, so it'll be 33 days by the time some of you are watching this. So first, just to review the dates, okay? It's not until 9 October when things are said and done, finally, because Venus will be leaving Leo on the 9 October. So that's the widest window of this Venus retrograde experience that we all got to go through here this summer. And I was just tweeting about this using a graphic from AstroSeek, but it's over a third of this year of 2023 that Venus will be in Leo, over a third of the complete year. And so Venus will spend most of its time in Leo. It's a lot of time for Venus in this sign. And so when it leaves Leo, we're finally done with this transaction. We're finally done with the house topic that Venus retrograded in and then moved out of Leo on 9 October. But there's always nuances to the flows within a retrograde cycle. I mean, the wider window is one thing, but the details of how things maybe flow and change are important to also analyze, these kind of sub-cycles of a retrograde. And the ones that we're in now, we've already had the retrograde station, so that was 23 July. Venus entered Leo on 5 June. And so we're now here in some of these middle sub-cycles of the retrograde. The next big date is the Cazimi of the Sun and Venus on the 13th of August. And then from there, you'll have the rebirth of Venus as a morning star. That takes place, I believe, on the, something like the 23rd of August. I have the charts here, we're gonna break all this down. And then you'll have Venus stationing direct on 4 September and then leaving on October 9th, leaving Leo altogether. So those are kind of sub-phases. And as each of those phases arrive, you get a stronger Venus, a reborn Venus, a purified Venus. And that's one thing I would say here, is look for a feeling of clarity about selfhood, a clarity of identity, clarity of values, and then a knowledge. You may be getting delivered knowledge of who you want to be and how you want to get into the rest of this year through these sub-cycles as they arrive. And then keep in mind here, you can see in this graphic, I have Venus into Libra, 8 November to 4 December. Venus gets very strong towards the end of that year, right as we get into fall, right into the middle and end of fall. And then you also have Venus in Virgo from 9 October to 8 November, ruling 2 eclipses. It rules the solar eclipse in Libra and the lunar eclipse in Taurus. So Venus is still a major player through the rest of the year. And we'll be tracking the Venus cycles here. I'll definitely be doing that. Okay, so what I wanted to do in this video was use this phrase, this very cliche phrase about Venus retrograde, which is the X returns. To most astrologers as a way in. We'll say, hey, Venus is retrograde, look for those X's to come back into your life. And so I want to use this as just a kind of a totem or a truism here, a Venus retrograde truism, but then to break it down and lead us into some of the deeper, realities about Venus retrograde. And I've already talked about this extensively here on many of my videos. So this is just a video with the sole focus on Venus retrograde and from more of a natal or interpersonal experience perspective. But this phrase is a short way into the energy. And so we're going to break this phrase down. That's basically the purpose of the video. Just looking at Venus, what is Venus? Because that's the planet we are focused on. That's the planet that's retrograding. This is a core feature of astrology. The planets, what they mean, is really the heart of the matter all the way through. I mean, if I were to develop an astrological course, we would just talk about the planets for a long time. What they mean, how they mix, what they do when they combine. It would simply be the meanings of the planets and creating with those meanings. That's what astrology is fundamentally. Now there's other techniques that are important, but that's the core. So in this video, Venus is pleasure, joy, relatings, so relationships and how we relate with others. The arts, all of the singing and the painting, the quote-unquote values. I have here, though not my favorite delineation, because values can include things like moral, intellectual, philosophical things that aren't quite Venus. I mean, Venus is more about the pleasure values, things we enjoy, things we find pleasure in. Less about like my core identity of self and how the ethics that I ascribe to, the ethics that, you know, I might deploy in my life. I think that might be more luminary, moon, and or sun, or maybe even Mercury or Jupiter. So I don't really like our values, even though I deploy it just because our values show us how we feel good. Often values can often be places where we are difficult to enforce our values or to go after our values. So that's why it gets complicated. Okay, so Venus can also be money, another delineation I don't really like, because I think it's more what we often spend money on to feel good again, to feel pleasure, to adorn ourselves. Jewelry, adornment, haircuts, all of that's Venus. And those things take money. You know, and so there is the kind of luxuries of life that Venus does signify clearly, and the pleasures and joys that money is often required to access those things. But Mercury is money in the older systems. The trading, the buying, the selling, the coins, that's all Mercury. The counting, these contemporary Venusian stereotypes, money and values, I think those are de-emphasized, and rather it's our relations, our joys, our pleasures, and the arts, etc. So the X, if we just come back to the phrase, how we're going to break this down, the X is presumably someone who in the past brought Venusian things into our lives, right? When we have an X, in particularly the romantic context, you shared relation, you shared pleasure, you shared money expenditures, that's dating, you do things that are fun, you shared hope. Often, if it's an important X, there's a notion of wanting to share a life and the hope for a shared future. You shared jewelry, right? People give each other jewelry, gifts, that's all Venus. And so that's why I think the X is a lovely stand-in for everything Venus. It's actually not about the literal romantic X returning during Venus retrograde, though that often happens. But it's about things from the past that embodied Venus maybe returning to the scene of all kinds and of all types of relationships. That's the thing I'd say, and I say it here. We need to broaden this to all types of relationships, and that could be friends, that could be family, that could be any type of relationship where there was Venusian elements to the relation, and to non-human things. This could be art that returns, hairstyles, this could be music or people or things or objects or anything. I think this is more commonly found during a Venus retrograde. I know for me, like not this one, but the one before, I cut my long hair and returned to my more buzz cut style that I'd had my whole life growing up where I did. It was just, you know, men got buzz cuts, and my family, military, that we got buzz cuts, you know, and I went back to these old styles. It was quite nice, you know, quite nice to get that long hair that I've only had once in my life and return to some of the older styles. Music I've seen people sending me music in DM. It's like, oh, that song I used to like or listen to, or even returning to the specific iterations of Venus via the star point cycle. Sometimes that music arrives back on the scene. But it's returning to things from the past that maybe haven't been around, and then the retrograde brings them back into the life. That's the core idea. So think about this in your life. We're 6 days in. We're almost 2 months into the Venus in Leo period. Maybe there's things that have returned of all kinds. of the Venusian nature that you're enjoying now. Okay, so we have the X. We've looked at the X. Now let's come back to return, the idea of, because it's the X returns. That's the 3-word sentence, the X returns, that we're breaking down as a way into the Venus retrograde. And so the returns, the verb, what does it mean? How can things come back? Well, there's so many ways. And I've listed a few here. There's literal phone calls or messages. You might wake up to a text or a DM of some kind. That's happened to me. I've talked about it a lot. Get that Facebook DM back when there was a Venus stationing retrograde of my ex. And this was before I was an astrologer, but when I began to study, I went back to important times in my history using the techniques I was learning. And that was one that shocked me because it was very important for my life at the time. And it happened exactly on the day of a Venus retrograde station. I mean, I have the date of the DM. So it was one of those literal moments that we get often as astrologers and as astrology students. It's a good way to study, by the way. Go back and rebuild your chronology with the techniques. Just put the transits up and look at those important days and see what was happening. Literal phone messages or DMs, vibes could return. You might have a feeling of an emotion or a state of mind or being that you haven't experienced before. I did this for myself with this retrograde. I remember back in 2015, I was just kind of a workhorse. I was working on some creative projects deeply that summer, and I was kind of just in my zone. I was, for me and who I am, I often can kind of just hole up and work. I love it. I love what I'm creating. It's a core theme of my life and my chart. I'm looking back at 2015 like, yeah, it makes sense. I'm kind of locked in this summer. I've been working a lot and really focused on some of the things I'm doing and building. So it can be vibes like that, energies that return, states of being. This is all Venus in a certain way too, especially if Venus rules your rising sign. And this is a whole nother layer I'm not going to get into in this video, but in your chart and in my chart, Venus does things. It's assigned dominion over topics. And so those topics are where maybe the energies might be returning for you, those house topics that Venus has assigned dominion over. And so then there's even this, review, consolidate, or cohere with projects. Let's say there's a lingering project that then you return to it during Venus retrograde. It calls you back into it. Prune and clip and, make it more robust. Especially these overlapping Venus and Mercury retrogrades that will be happening in August. I don't have the dates in this video of the Mercury retrograde, but it's later in August. That will both be retrograde simultaneously. And that might be the best time to review and consolidate and cohere with projects, because Mercury can overlap here a little bit with Venus, because Mercury is more the detail, analytical, magical side. Venus is the creative and the kind of pleasure and the art and all of that. And so there may be something like writing the letter or doing this kind of inventory work on our lives that August might be better for when you have both of those planets retrograde. Okay, so we looked at the X and returns, and we've broken it down. And hopefully what we've done is set up this idea of some of the possible manifestations of Venus retrograde. We could layer in Leo. And of course, always layering in Leo and the sun. And this is more the self. It brings in the identity and the awareness and the consciousness. That's another layer. That this could be more about reviewing our identity and our ways of being. And that's what I was saying earlier when I mentioned it's connected to house topics, but it's also the idea of the sign. And so you might be embodying parts of yourself or re-embodying parts of yourself because it's in Leo. Examples that I've seen in the media, and just lay a few out. These are pretty literal and they're important to trace. And I just wanted to know, these are things from Twitter, these are things from current public figures. This is not to gossip or to suggest judgment in any way, shape, or form. It's just literally like reporting the news here with an eye of astrology and filtering it through the astrology to study and learn. So this first one, GB News star Dan Wootton unmasked and cashed for sexual images catfishing scandal, Byline Times. This is, I guess, a British television star who had reported a lot on celebrities. And this scandal comes out. I don't even know anything about the scandal other than he was in a scandalized, posture all over my timeline. And so this is one of the ideas, a scandal. In this case, a past behavior emerges to haunt. And it's related to Venus, right? He's having these kind of toxic relationships. That's like a toxic Venus. I don't know anything about his chart, but he's having to kind of revisit, pay the checks that he's written. He's having to put the money up for these checks in the sense that this karmic kind of revisiting of past behavior. So it's a classic Venus retrograde story that if we may have done things in the past and these retrogrades emerge. This happens right around the station. So 17 July is when this story broke. The station retrograde happens 23 July. So Venus was in that degree, I think, on that day. It entered the degree of the retrograde station, and all of a sudden this story breaks. So you may be thinking about things you've done in the past or reviewing some of your past behavior. And that's life. We've all done things we regret. I'm not saying to this level, but we're kind of paying on those promises through our past actions. Maybe this idea of a karmic model of reality, but still, that's life. We own our karma and we have to process and deal with it. And this is how I actually found out about this story. Now, it was coming through my timeline with a few different tweets, but it was the singer Lily Allen, the English singer, I think British, English singer Lily Allen. I think she may be from Wales or Scotland, I don't know, but I think she's from England. And Lily Allen quote tweeted this tweet from Dan Wooten from a long time ago. He had written an article for The Sun, July 2015. Dan Wooten was commenting on Lily Allen and basically being rude to her because Lily Allen, some paparazzi took a picture of her unconscious in a party field at a music festival, and she had, was partying, and that was part of her story. But it was summer 2015, the last time Venus was about to station retrograde, right in the late degrees of Leo. I think it was, the date's hard to see, so 5 July 2015, Venus squarely in Leo at that time, at the Venus star point cycle. And so Lily Allen quote tweeted Dan Wooten. She was then talking about it. I don't even know if Lily Allen knows about the astrology. She may, but she very likely may not. And she wrote this whole thing that she says she takes responsibility for her own past actions, that she had her hand on the heart. That's Leo and Venus. That's a real synchronicity around this Venus retrograde in Leo. And she was then describing her state in the past, again, the mental state, the ways of being, how she was bullied by Dan Wooten, constant surveillance and bullying. Anyways, karma's a bitch. I didn't even realize that she was going to talk about karma, and I had just talked about karma. And basically, she couldn't be happier now. But Lily Allen, because of this Dan Wooten scandal, was sort of forced to relive that trauma in the past where Dan Wooten piled onto her. So it's a perfect example of like both scandal and states of being and karma all returning from the last Venus star point cycle in July 2015. I saw this and I was like, wow, this is amazing. And credit to Lily Allen. I mean, seems to be a very, we need to heal sometimes. Things come up from our past relationships, and it's good to see them and talk about them and try to address them and try to heal and call things out that need to be called out. I mean, there's no, in my view, excuse for this kind of scandalization of another person's pain. That's not healthy. And so Lily Allen was able to address that and hopefully she sounds like she's in a much better place. It's really cool to see that. Okay, next story. And this is about the theme of relationship reevaluation. And that might be euphemistic for breakup. And there's been so many celebrity breakups that have happened right as Venus was stationing retrograde. Countless. I'm not going to list them all, but an uncanny number. And of course on astrology X, I guess Twitter, and I'm going to go into that here in a second, but on X, the app X, all the astrologers there were talking about this as every breakup came online. We're like, wow, this is Venus retrograde. But this is the thing, breakups can be healthy. I mean, just because a couple decides to not be together doesn't mean it's some kind of negative thing. It's just a reevaluation around values in the context of relating. And that's where I think it's Venus style values is the way to say that. Reevaluating what someone wants in the context of a relationship with another person. So here's the story. Ethan Slater's wife was completely blindsided by his relationship with Ariana Grande. I never know. Grande? Someone will correct me immediately in the comments, and that's cool. No offense to her. I should learn that. She's such a big pop star. But the pair suddenly broke up when nothing appeared wrong between them. And that is this scandal. It's both scandalous in a way, but at the same time, it's a reevaluation of a relationship, and it's the beginning of a relationship. I mean, it's all of the peaks and emphasis that when Venus stations, it brings to the topic of relationships. You saw it here with this Ariana Grande story and all of the others that came out. And so then, of course, on the topic of self-identity and reevaluating our identities or ourselves, we have to point out that on the day, 23 July, of the retrograde station of Venus, Elon Musk tweets X, the new X logo, and Twitter changes to X now. It rebranded on the day of the retrograde station. And of course, a lot of people are saying, hey, that's not a good thing. Hey, Elon, it's a Venus RX retrograde station. I wouldn't have elected that. I probably would have gone a few days before, that 19th July Leo moon election applying to Venus. But still, it fits the symbolism. You know, as the retrograde station happens, the identity is changed. And it goes back to something in Musk's history. He had X.com registered for decades and has always talked about an X app. He's returning to a creative project from his past during the retrograde. It's quite literal. But just an example, and I made a tweet on Twitter, I was like, X's return during Venus retrograde. It's a perfect example. X came, this X returned. To play on words, the letter X versus an X relationship. But that was quite literal, the day of the retrograde station, to have an X emerge in the social media space through now what we call the X app. Okay, so those are the examples that I wanted to point out, mainly so you can think about your own life and use those examples to consider what you're going through with the Venus retrograde in your own life. But now I want to pivot just to a few upcoming charts, just to ground us in the upcoming astrology here, so you have a more detailed map of maybe how this is going to unfold. Venus Cazimi arrives on the 13th of August to purify. Venus enters what is called the heart of the sun. Again, it's a heart. The phrase in the heart of the sun means Venus, means a planet meeting the sun by conjunction. But this one's happening in Leo, the zodiac sign that corresponds with the heart, and Venus is the planet in the Vedic models and the yogic models that is the planet of the heart chakra. I broke that down in one of my previous videos. So it's all of this heart energy, purifying the heart, that we get on 13 August. I think it's a lovely chart. You can look here. It's this waning Cancer moon, but a beautiful Cancer moon in its own domicile. That moon, it will be applying very earlier in the day to Jupiter, its exaltation lord. And you have that moon-Jupiter mutual reception vis-a-vis exaltation. You know, this is a nice energy to have, I think, a nice moon to kind of grapple with this very purified moment here with Venus. You can pay attention to how the story is altered on this day, maybe for the better. I mean, this could be when the breakthroughs come. You're like, yes, I feel purified. Yes, let's say, this is an example, someone's going through some kind of breakup, a reevaluation with a partner. It may be this day that there's clarity about the necessity of why the partners needed to take a break or to split. And this might be a confidence renewing moment of like, yeah, okay, this was inevitable. We have different values or different ideas about how to live well together, and so we need to part, and now there's a refreshment of self as a newly single person. Remember these themes, Venus and Leo, are about the heart and therefore love. Agapic, divine love, this open, radiant heart that we all have as we move through reality. And I wanted to bring a book suggestion here. I studied Theravada Buddhism as a young person in my late teens and early 20s. I went on many silent meditation retreats because I was just struck by the power of these teachings. And Jack Kornfield was one of my teachers. I was at his center in Marin County in California. I actually met him and have been around him a little bit. But this text from Jack Kornfield, A Path with Heart, is a foundational text in those studies in that period of my life. But I just love the title. You can read it, it's good if you're interested in Theravada Buddhism and some of the teachings of the Buddha from that tradition, or just universal teachings here in the West. These guys, Jack Kornfield and some others, created like a Western style Buddhism that they were sort of codifying with some texts they published in the 90s and in the early aughts. You see here the Path of American Buddhism, the essential basics in our crazy modern life. So it's a great book if you're interested in Buddhism, but it's more the title, A Path with Heart, and the subtitle, A Guide Through the Perils and Promises of Spiritual Life. I mean, this is the kind of Venus retrograde in Leo, purified in the heart of the sun. These are the themes I would go to as kind of maybe one of the higher octaves. The deeply spiritual nature of reality and of self and of our individualism, and how we can renew that and open our hearts anew to face life anew and all the challenges and difficulties that are inevitable in life. So check out this book, but just think about, where's your heart center? How connected to your heart are you? How are you loving? You know, everybody, and I mean everybody, everyone you meet. That John Lennon song, I love that, Instant Karma. To come back to the karma theme that's in this video, he says, you better recognize your brother, everyone you meet. Everyone's your sibling, ultimately, I believe, in terms of this larger agapic spiritual internet connectivity that we're encased in here. So consider some of these themes, and then consider it in the house topic. How is that love being brought into like your second house? If you are a Cancer rising, maybe there's new relationships to money that's viewed in a more spiritual way, or a heart-centered or heartfelt way, just as one example. Okay, and here's the chart I mentioned earlier. Venus emerges from the sun's beams, aka is reborn as a morning star on 23 August, so I was right earlier, and right on the Virgo ingress of the sun. 7 days before and after, Venus is very powerful. So in the Hellenistic tradition, when a planet is 15 degrees away from the sun, it becomes emergent. It emerges out from the beams of the sun. They use that as 15-degree range as a proxy for visibility. And it's said in the Hellenistic tradition, the 7 days before and after that point are extremely powerful for a planet. And so we saw it when Venus stationed retrograde. We had the Barbie movie being released, Oppenheimer being released. We had the celebration of cinema, which is a Venusian topic, right as Venus was powerful. Will we get another one of these? And this might be even more powerful because Venus is stationing direct and has emerged and has been reborn with visibility rather than being falling under the sun's beams and going backward like it was earlier in July. So look for these days. It's like the, what would it be? The 15th through the 30th of August. Venus, we call it in phasis, being reborn as a morning star and at its direct station, which will be upcoming on 4 September. And so just think about it. Let's look at the chart a little bit here. So this is the 23rd. The Virgo season begins. A lot of the energy shifts into a temporary stellium in Virgo. That might take some of the pressure off Venus, might give Venus, it's averse there to Virgo, so maybe it gives it a little bit more room. Now, the sun is there, the ruler is there, the domicile ruler, so, we're going to be sucked into Virgo no matter what. I don't want to go too much into that here, because that will be another video, what Virgo is, why the stellium's here happening, the full Mercury retrograde. That's a whole nother topic. What else is going on in this chart? I think I would be focused on the exact square from Jupiter. Right as Jupiter is about to station retrograde, you have it exactly squaring Venus. And this is that looping mutual reception I've talked about so much. It's the joys and the truths and revelations of the unity of nature, and how that can push and support us as we have this new reborn identity. And so I wouldn't sleep on, again, Jupiter and Taurus's ability to bring us into the natural, bring us into nature. Perfect during summer if you're in the Northern Hemisphere. Down under, you may have some winter wherever you are, maybe getting out into some of the snow, some of the death of nature, but it's still nature. But this Venus, or get inside if it's cold where you are, around the plants and get into that natural green, that earthy stuff. You're getting your hand in soil, these types of things. Then the final chart I want to look at is that, remember, Venus still rules nearly everything in the transiting sky. And I almost just said that. I'm glad I waited because I had a whole slide here about it, especially Saturn, Jupiter, and Ketu. And so this could be a big push forward into the late summer period and fall period. That's how important I think this station direct and this rebirth of Venus is, because all of those planets that rely on Venus right now, the planet in Pisces, Saturn, Libra, Ketu, and Taurus, Jupiter, they get supported and a major push ahead with Venus's direct station. And so I think there's very much something here about the major story of this year. After Saturn entered Pisces and Jupiter entered Taurus, and then they perfected a sextile in June, has been our Taurus and Pisces houses and their relationship to each other, the dreamy, imaginative new boundaries, and then that earthy truth as we kind of basically trip into nature. Sober, I'm not advocating a drug-induced trip, but getting into nature and experiencing the wonders of nature, like I've said a few times. All of those themes now have some kind of major support. It's almost like we know ourselves better with this very tripped out Saturn and Pisces, Jupiter and Taurus moment, which I'm enjoying greatly. And I can't wait for this because we get deeper into the joys of that. Look for that push. And if you've been struggling and if you've had, unique challenges here, just know this is a time, 13 August to 23rd August, when Venus purified comes out from under the sun's beams and then stations direct in 4 September to look for a pivot. Give yourself some narrativization around a pivot that's coming up here in August. That's the best use of astrology, positive projection. And I hope you can experience that if you're needing something like that. So that's it for this video. Have a great Venus retrograde. I hope it's going okay so far. And I hope this video can help you maybe contextualize what's happening as you interface with the transiting astrology. You can always go to my website, sjanderson144.com, check out where the planets are, the correspondences of the tarot, which is below this. Check out my reading schedule if you're interested in that. And we'll talk real soon. Take care. Have a good one.